Roll call.
Counsel Barton?
Present.
Present. Counsel Capano?
Present.
Present. Counsel Chakutis? Present. Present. Counsel Calucci? Present. Counsel Seer?
Present.
Counsel Field?
Present.
Present. Counsel LaPierre?
Present.
Present. Counsel Lozey?
Present.
Present. Counsel Net?
Present.
Present. Counsel Staben?
Present.
Present. Counsel Walsh?
Present. All rise for a moment of silence, and please let's remember ex-Councilor Bob Cipoletti. Thoughts and prayers.
And Ann Goldstein, the family of Ann Goldstein.
And also the family of Ivy Spector.
Former City Councilor Robert Weber.
Pledge of Allegiance.
United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Motion to accept the minutes of the
So moved.
October
Second.
9th meeting. Motion made. Seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Councilor LaPierre.
Mr. President, motion to suspend the rules.
First, let's see if there's any communications from the mayor.
Dear Councilors, pursuant to Section 5 of the ordinance titled Reorganizing the Office of the City Solicitor, approved by the City Council on July 15, 2015, I am hereby appointing James Wellock as third Assistant City Solicitor of the City of Lynn, effective October 29, 2018. Pursuant to Section 5 of above referenced ordinance and Section 3-9 of the City Charter, I respectfully requesting that the City Council confirm Mr. Wellock's appointment at your October 23, 2018 meeting. Sincerely, Mayor Thomas M. McGee.
Motion made by Councilor LaPierre, to suspend the rules, seconded by Councilor Calucci. Councilor LaPierre.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. We are recommending out of the Personnel Subcommittee the appointment of Mr. James Waylock to confirm the mayor's appointment.
Motion made, seconded, discussion, roll call.
Counsel Barton?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Capano?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Chakutis?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Calucci? Yes. Counsel Seer?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Field?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel LaPierre?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Lozey?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Net?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Staben?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Walsh?
Yes.
Yes.
Is there another appointment?
Yes, there is. Mr. President, we are recommending out of the Personnel Subcommittee the reappointment of Joseph Smart, the Director of Building and Grounds.
Second.
Also a mayoral appointment.
Sorry, the clerk hadn't read that, I thought she did. Would you read that for us, Madam Clerk?
Dear Councilors, pursuant to Section 2-3 of the Lynn City Charter, I am hereby reappointing Joseph Smart as Director of Buildings and Grounds effective November 10, 2018. Pursuant to Section 3-9 of the Lynn City Charter, I am respectfully requesting that the Council confirm Mr. Smart's reappointment at your October 23, 2018 meeting. Sincerely, Mayor Thomas M. McGee.
Would you like to make that motion?
Yes,
again,
motion
Counselor?
to reappoint the mayor's recommendation, Joseph Smart.
Motion made, seconded, discussion, roll call.
Counsel Barton?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Capano?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Chakutis?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Calucci?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Seer?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Field?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel LaPierre?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Lozey?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Net?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Staben?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Walsh?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. New business. And this is on the $4.5 million bond. I'm going to ask the mayor and the CFO. I'm going to ask Sean Cronin. I don't know if Mike wants to get up first maybe and give us a little bit of history, what's going on. Would you guys feel more comfortable if you sat up here? And
Take your lead, what would you like?
it's up to you, Mayor. You're the boss, you're the big guy. Go for it.
I'm okay here right now.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to speak tonight, and I think it's an opportunity to, again, reiterate the need for authorizing the $4.5 million borrowing for the FY19 budget. What I'd like to do is recap where we've been over the last 9 months with a lot of close work with the council and with your support, pretty much right after I came into office in January, it was clear that we had a $9.5 million deficit we were facing for FY18, with a looming deficit in FY19. All of the numbers reflected that. So working closely with you, all the members of the council, we worked to come up with a strategy, and that strategy was to go to the state, file legislation to ask for an authority to borrow money to allow us to bridge the gap for those 2 fiscal years. And again, working through your support and working then through the legislative delegation and the legislature and final approval from the governor, we were able to create legislation which allowed the city to borrow $14 million over a 2-year period to bridge that ongoing gap, which we were well aware of as of early in January. We borrowed in spring, I think it was March, the first $9.5 million to fill the hole that we knew was sitting there for FY18. As with many municipalities, the FY19 budget had to be voted on by the council and signed by the mayor before the state budget was finalized. And again, working closely with all of you as this budget went on, and we worked through that budget over a number of months, going through all of the different challenges we faced. Again, I want to thank the council for your work with us on that. We recognize that we put a budget on the table that clearly outlined that we were going to need to borrow $4 million with potential to borrow the full $4.5 million. And I want to be clear on this. That's the $14 million that we all together authorized through the legislation, recognizing early on that those numbers reflected a 2-year deficit that we had to face, and it also gave us time to get our hands around what was a really deep and growing hole in our budget. And again, with your help, we were able to make that happen. So here we are to finalize that $4.5 million, those $4.5 million to borrow to get us through FY19. This budget was approved before the state budget was approved. It was based on state aid estimates and borrowing for the $4.5 million, as I said earlier, remaining available to us from that deficit legislation. But as the result of the state budget becoming finalized by the governor in early July, our budget at that point was not balanced based on the budget that was signed by the governor, and I think Mike Bertino will be able to lay that out clearly on what that meant, and I'll let him get to the numbers. I don't want to repeat that, but the reality was, because of those state numbers and in addition doubling of claims that were made in June on health insurance that budgeted for $400,000, that number became $800,000. We at that point were approximately $1.7 million out of budget. And again, I want to be clear, this is not an additional amount of money we're asking for. This is separate from the deficit legislation. This money that is separate from the deficit legislation. This is the money that we had, I think, talked about from the beginning, that had authorized for 18 and recognized that we were going to need to use for FY19's budget. And I just want to make clear on a couple of things we did in FY19's budget. We fully funded health insurance, which hadn't been done in a number of years, which is a very positive and important step. We put in an additional $880,000 into what is a limited reserve fund, but we did put money away for that. We added an additional $300,000 for snow and ice. Will hopefully be a little bit of a buffer above what we have budgeted in the past, and fully funded a number of different other line items as well that were really important. So we did do a lot of, I think, really positive things related to the budget, and that's reflected in the 19 budget. But again, the $4.5 million that we are asking for the authorization for tonight always was under the understanding that that budget included those dollars. We have received approval from the Department of Revenue's Director of Accounts to borrow this remaining balance. We've been working closely with both Sean Cronin, who's our Fiscal Stability Officer in the Department of Revenue, and the Department of A&F, to ensure that we are making the right decisions and moving the city forward, and they are working closely with us to ensure that the decisions we're making are supported, and they are with us on moving forward on this approval for the bond. Our CFO's recommendations for closing the remainder gap comes primarily from unfilled positions. So I want to be clear on this as well. We're borrowing $4.5 million. The additional $500,000 is a part of what we're trying to do to fill that deficit that I mentioned earlier. But we're also, I think, over $600,000, and Mike, again, you can clear that number up. that will be in reductions from the current budget. So we're not just borrowing money, the extra $500,000, we're also looking at $600,000 in savings, and those dollars will be coming from unfilled positions in the first quarter, as well as several other items. So we are also taking money out of that budget to make sure that we have a balanced budget, which will allow us to get in, borrow the money, get the money, be able to have a balanced budget so that we can set our tax rate in December and send out our tax bills, which is something we were not able to do last year. So I think, again, that's progress in terms of moving forward and addressing many of the issues we face together. Again, the consequences of not borrowing this would be we would be unable to we would not have a balanced budget. We would not be able to set our tax rate. We would not be able to get the related tax dollars that come from us sending out the tax bills to the citizens, and it would be a substantially serious problem we would be facing at that point. This clearly is something that I would hope all of you would be willing to continue to work with us on as we move forward. It's the right action at this time, and I ask for your support on that. Again, I think you're all aware of this, but I want to reiterate it for people that are following what we're doing. We didn't get here overnight, and our fiscal stability is not going to be solved overnight either. But as I stated in March, and I will again tonight, I believe this has and will give us the best chance to move to a more stable, stronger, and budget in this cycle, and really help us plan for our future. We have a strong uphill battle for going into FY20 budget, 2020 budget. And again, I think Mike will speak to this as well. We have already, with the department heads, talked about the 2020 budget, and I think probably earliest in many years, we are actually starting the budget in October. So we'll be working closely with all of you, continuing to give you the information you need so we can work on the issues that we face together. And that budget will be an ongoing process. And I know it, last year, I think it was a much earlier budget that had been done in the past. And I think in October, it'll give us a chance to really address the challenges we face in 2020, working months and months ahead of what the ultimate budget approval will be next June. I really look forward to continuing to work as partners so that we can move past these challenging times together. And I know that we're all working together because we care about this city and we're trying to move the city forward. None of us want to be back here again, so we want to make sure we make the right decisions. And again, I strongly believe that this action is what we need to do, and it's something we've talked about since January. Said from the beginning that in order to get our fiscal house in order, we were going to have to make some difficult decisions, but these decisions are necessary for the city and for the well-being of the people that we represent. So again, I look forward to working with the council president, vice president, and all of you as we continue to address these issues and others, and continue to build a partnership that I really believe will be the type of partnership that we can really address these ongoing challenges. This is something that has been coming for a number of years. It's really been a big challenge, but we really need to understand that this legislation is the first step, again, in trying to build the bridge, which is 18 and 19, to 2020. And again, we're going to have to make some really tough decisions in 2020, but by studying the budget early in October, working with all of you, those decisions and those challenges will be clear to us and to the public that we represent as we move forward. So again, thank you for allowing me to speak, and I'd like to ask Mike to come forward and maybe in a clearer way lay out some of the numbers more concisely. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First and foremost, I'm here to answer anybody's questions they may have on any of the items you're going to vote for tonight. But to clarify the numbers, as the mayor stated, the budget presented was originally in balance. The governor, in July of 2018, signed the final budget, and what happened was we received approximately 1.7 more in cherry sheet charges, which mostly relate to charter school tuition. So they took 1.7 away from us. They gave us back $695,000 in additional state aid. So at that point in time, we were stuck with about a $1.1 million deficit. Essentially, our budget was out of balance. So what we did is we opted to recommend taking the remaining $500,000 of the bailout money. All the work was done. It was discussed for the last 6 or 7 months. It was right there, so we opted to get permission to borrow that. And additionally, As the mayor stated, we cut about $579,000 in line items that were, wouldn't affect anybody, wouldn't affect the operations. Mostly were from positions that weren't hired or premiums that came in lower than anticipated. There was one little change that you'll vote on where we asked the school to participate in the cut. Rather than cutting their budget, they recently received a grant and they're going to allocate $200,000 of that grant money to the city. So essentially, we'll reduce one of our cuts by $50,000 and we'll be back in balance. So that was something that happened there that we're going to be looking forward to not doing again in the future. But again, until you get a final budget from the governor, you don't know your exact numbers. Where this budget is so tight and we don't have any reserves to draw from, it was necessary. And although it's a large amount of money for an individual, it's actually small when you consider the overall budget. As far as the other items you're going to vote on tonight, they're all equally as important, but there's just a couple things I wanted to point out. Whenever a city accepts deficit funding or aid from their agency, like we did from the state, by definition, we failed to balance the budget. We met the definition just like back in 2008, when all those banks had all these losses that they never recorded on their books. And what they had to do is the federal government came in and gave all these banks billions of dollars to help them from not failing. Well, essentially, we were given a $14 million lifeline from the state of Massachusetts. We just didn't receive the oversight that many other communities who accepted a bailout from the state. It was negotiated between our mayor and the governor and his people that this problem occurred over time. And it's going to take time to fix this problem. And we're in daily contact with our fiscal stability officer. He's here tonight. Everything in that act that was passed back in the spring, we're following. We're committed to helping this city turn around. But you can't forget the fact that anybody who takes bailout money, like we did, at one point in time, we failed. So it's important that the people behind me and the people in front of me work together to come up with solutions to solve this problem. And it can be solved, but it's going to take an understanding of everybody involved that some tough decisions are going to come. And we need to be prepared as a community, as an elected officials, to make those tough decisions and work together to find a solution. And I just wanted everybody to hear that, because mostly everybody, Springfields, the Chelseas, and the few others that took on aid also took on a receiver. We didn't take on a receiver, we were given the opportunity, and we're committed to making this opportunity work. Again, I'm here to answer any questions. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew where we stood and that this is a serious issue, but we do have a plan. We're going to share that plan as time permits, and we're going to work together to get us out of this fiscal situation.
Thank you, Mike. Does anybody have any questions for Mike? Councilor Starbin.
Thank you. Mike and the mayor, I appreciate the time. I spent time with the mayor last week, and we spent a little time tonight answering questions. When the budget was passed for FY19, how much of that included the remaining part of this bailout loan?
The remaining, the original budget used $4 million, but with the memo that I have that was passed out by our fiscal stability officer, there was a caveat in there that saying that these are estimates because the governor hadn't signed the final budget yet. But there was $4 million of that money already in that budget to make it balanced.
And then there was the 12 plus 2. So somewhere in the process, it was felt that maybe we could close both budget gaps with 12 million with the extra 2 with the approval of Mr. Cronin, correct?
I believe at one point in time that was correct. It was 12, plus we needed Division of Local Services approval to get the other 2. So, we took 9.5 million, and to make it a little bit easier to understand is we took that 9.5 million and we didn't use any of the trash money, because only a very, very small portion of the trash money came in. Now, since the bills went out and the money has been coming in, we get to use that estimated trash revenue of approximately $2 million in addition to the $4 million at the time, now requesting $4.5 million. So it's $9.5 million plus the $4.5 million remaining. But also, that $2 million is relatively new to the city, and we're just realizing in fiscal year 2019, a full year of sending out that billing. So those are probably the most significant changes that were made to balance the budget.
And knowing you can count on that 2 million in future years, you're using that to help close the potential 2020 gap.
Yes, that and all other monies that belong to the general fund will be used to help close that gap.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mike? Okay, thank you, Mike. I'm going to ask Sean Cronin to come up and give us his views. He's been working with Mike on a daily basis, and the mayor and Buzzy and myself had a meeting with him prior to coming out here tonight. I don't know if you can ever feel any better about our situation, but I can tell you this, that I know the mayor and the CFO were very passionate in the meeting that we had earlier this evening, and I know they're putting everything they have into trying to fix the issues that we're faced with, and I appreciate what both of them are doing as well as what Sean Cronin is doing. So, Sean, I give the mic to you.
Thank you. And I'll echo that. The mayor and Michael are certainly spending the time figuring out what the right things to do are, because there's no real easy solutions, but I am talking with Michael a lot, getting to know him, so it's great.
Excuse me, Sean.
Yes.
Could you identify yourself to the viewers at home?
I'm sorry, my name's Sean Cronin. I'm here as the Fiscal Stability Officer appointed by the Secretary of A&F. In my role at the state, as I head up the Division of Local Services, which is an agency within the Department of Revenue. So what I thought I'd do is just spend a few minutes, but not too many because the socks are on, no rain delay, and talk a little bit about what you just talked about, and then spend a little bit more time on fiscal 20, which is, really important, and the mayor alluded to that, so I want to focus a little bit on that. So the 19 stuff, I think the amendments before you, I think they're pretty straightforward. Both Michael and the mayor spoke to them. I think it's pretty straightforward. So just going to slide 3, and the numbers are down on the bottom right. So I want to just take a big picture look at the city's budget, and I think I said this the last time I was here. You're a good-sized business. You're a $350 million business. And this is one of the larger municipalities in Massachusetts, both population-wise and budget-wise. So there's a lot going on. So if you look at the pie chart, the biggest expense is the schools, which isn't a surprise. It's pretty much the way it is in every municipality. The second might be a surprise. It's employee benefits. So nearly 25% of the budget, or $81 million, is benefits. And I'll get into that in a couple slides. And then the third is public safety. Again, no surprise. Most communities spend a lot of money on police and fire. So that, when you look at the $350 million, that's where those are the 3 biggest pieces of where the money goes. Going on to the next chart, next slide, there's 3 charts. It looks at the budget another way. So looking at the chart on the left, where's the money go? Well, we all know that local government is a service industry, and it takes people or contractors to provide the services. In most instances, it's people. Again, primarily police, fire, teachers, et cetera. And because of that, in Lynn, 79% of the budget is wages and benefits. Okay, so then look at the top top right, we break out employee benefits. You'll see that 48 million is in health insurance, and that's the city's share. That's not the total amount spent on health insurance, that's what the taxpayers put in. And then 29 million is pensions, and that's on a fixed schedule. Every 2 years you get revalued. So where's the rest of the budget go? That's the 21%, so the bottom right. If you look at this, for the most part, it's fixed, right? And what I mean by that is debt service. Once it's issued, you got to pay for it. Your reserves, most of that is fixed. Half of that is that stability fund that you're required to fund per the legislation, the deficit legislation. Your insurance policy is somewhat fixed. Your school non-personnel costs, I would argue, are somewhat fixed because the city struggled meeting net school spending in the past. So it's not like you can say, hey, take 10% of that away from the schools because you got to meet your net school spending. So what you really got for non-people is about $25 million, and that covers the gamut from contracted services, snow removal, trash removal, grounds maintenance, buildings maintenance, police equipment, fire equipment, all that type of stuff. So going to the next page, net school spending. The reason why I put this in here is you can't, in some communities that are well above net school spending, you can actually have the discussion, it's not a pleasant one, but about pulling back the municipality's appropriation for schools. In Lynn, you really can't because you're just at net school spending. And if you look at the circle, the orange circle, you see the green dashed line, that's where you were supposed to be. The solid blue line is where you ended up. And that was one of the reasons why the city got into the financial situation you're in. The city didn't meet net school spending for a couple of years in a row. So the point of this is, it's not like a municipal department where you can say, well, geez, let's cut X percent out of it. I mean, they might be able to be more efficient in how they spend their money, but you can't reduce it because there's a net school spending number that you got to reach. The next slide, just a reminder of the free cash history, because it is technically an available fund that you can spend, so it's a revenue source. But clearly you can see the rapid decline in this, and that was because, in addition to not funding things like health insurance, not funding net school spending at the level you're supposed to, the city used free cash. And it was using free cash to pay bills it should have paid previously. So that's why you see the very steep decline. In last year, the free cash was certified at give or take $1 million. And you actually applied it all to the 19 budget. In free cash, I was just asking, the balance sheet should be coming into us pretty soon, and we'll see what you got. If you have any, my recommendation would be don't spend it, save it, hold on to it. We don't know how bad the winter's going to be, which I'll get to in a second. So looking at fiscal 20, and I know Michael's working on a financial forecast, and this is something I said the first time I came. Yeah, a community really needs to do financial projections. And in Massachusetts, it's actually not rocket science. You got Prop 2.5, so you know how your largest revenue stream is going to go. It's 2.5 growth plus new growth. And you're not forecasting income taxes or sales taxes based upon some regression analyses or anything. You've got property tax, you've got your own local receipts, which for the most part are stagnant unless you make some fee changes. And you got local aid, which is kind of a wild card. So it's not that difficult to put together a revenue and expenditure projection. I know Michael's working on that. So what I did was take a very preliminary preview, and I'm going to say very preliminary multiple times because this is October. It's the first crack at it. But some things you don't have that you had going in your favor in 19. You had $4.5 million of money to help plug a deficit. You don't have that in fiscal 20. Michael mentioned the trash fee. That $2 million was used to help balance the fiscal 19 budget. While it's in your base in fiscal 20, you won't see an increase of $2 million again. So your local receipt budget is going to be relatively flat. In fiscal 19, there's zero in for collectively bargained agreements. So union employee increases. There's nothing in the 19 budget. So there's a big decision about 20. Will there be the ability to provide raises for employees in fiscal 20? If there is, you need to budget for it. That's something that communities have gotten in trouble across the state. You don't put money aside in the budget, and it happened here. You negotiate a contract, you sign the contract, now you got to pay it, and you wonder where the money's coming from to pay for it. So if there's a plan to fund CBAs in fiscal 19, you need to, fiscal 20, you need to pay for it. You also had a relatively easy time making net school spending, if you remember, because of two things. One, you were required for 4 years to increase the appropriation, or the net school spending number, by $2.2 million to make up for the deficits of the past. You didn't have to do that in 19. And then also you had the final 25% recognition of retiree health insurance for teachers. So those two things combined enabled you to get to your net school spending number a lot easier than you will in fiscal 20, because you don't have those two. So punchline is you're going to probably need more municipal money to go into the school budget in fiscal 20 than you did in fiscal 19. On to the next slide, just a couple of additional pressures. You have a very rapidly growing school enrollment. If you look at, there's been a 25% increase in the number of students in your public schools over the last decade. That's not only going to put financial pressure on your budget, there's a physical structure issue. Where are you going to put the kids? And the facilities aren't in great shape. So this is going to be an increasing problem, I think, for the city, unless magically the enrollment tapers off. And I mentioned facilities. The bottom chart looks at debt service. The city, over the last X number of years, really has underinvested in its capital infrastructure. You have school buildings, you have municipal buildings, streets, sidewalks, sewer systems, parks, playgrounds, everything that the city needs to plan, and plan in a way that you're able to afford it, and ideally in a way that you don't have to ask the taxpayers every time you need to do a significant project. So, for example, the school project that are in discussions with the MSBA on, the Pickering, my understanding is that is most likely going to be funded via debt exclusion. So if the voters say no, the project doesn't get done, where does that get you? You still have a school that's in very poor shape. So a way around that is you plan, you develop a good capital plan. And the reason why I put this chart in is if you look at fiscal 17, you had about $7.5 million of debt service, okay? Now I should say this is net of MSBA reimbursements, which have actually ended, and it also doesn't include the deficit financing note. So this is, what I would call regular debt. You had a $2.5 million decrease in debt service. So what did the city do? It used it to basically balance the budget. Instead of having fiscal discipline to say, we're going to stay at that level. Debt service is a percent of our budget. So if you could afford it in fiscal 17, arguably, you should have been able to afford it going forward. The only way to put together a capital plan is to put some parameters around how much the city can afford. And you do that by looking at how much debt you got. And if you let the debt run off, and we see this a lot across the state, once you let debt run off, it gets recaptured for ongoing operating purposes. So you can't all of a sudden go back and then say, well, we're going to carve that out now. We don't need that operating money anymore. We're going to use it for debt. Because you all know, once you put something in the operating budget, it's very difficult to get it back, whether it's cost of living adjustments for employees or some new service that the residents want. So the point here is the city is you do have budget pressure. You just don't see it yet. You have the need to issue debt, develop a capital plan to undertake some significant capital infrastructure. So down the road, that's going to be something you're going to need to focus on. And then this to me, again, very preliminary. You see there's a couple of asterisks here. This is not a final analysis. This is not a projected deficit because by law, the mayor is going to submit to you a balanced budget. So there's going to be a whole bunch of decisions made between now and in the spring about how to balance a budget. But what I wanted to do was just walk through with you in very basic terms what fiscal 20 could look like. And again, this isn't overly complicated in the way mass municipal finance works. So you got 4 revenue sources, well, major revenue, property taxes. 2.5 plus new growth is about $4.78 million for the city, okay? This is, I should say, this is growth. This isn't total, this is growth. State aid, so I had somebody in my office who does a number of financial forecasts for communities across the state, put together a admittedly quick analysis, but what would it take, what does net school spending look like for the city of Lynn in fiscal '20, and what piece of that is covered by the state through Chapter 70. So she put it together, and this is what we've got. So there's about I think it's $8 or $9 million increase in Chapter 70. The rest is from unrestricted general government aid, and the governor has made a promise and lived up to it in each of his budgets to grow what's called UGA by the same rate of growth as state aid. So I got a plug of $3.5 million. And I should stress, these are all estimates, these are assumptions. Nobody said that local aid is going to grow by 3.5%. This is me saying, here's a scenario of local aid growing in that rate. Local receipts, we talked about that. You don't have something like you had last year where you get $2 million of new money to put toward the budget. What you have is the last 3 or 4 months of meals tax. In the current fiscal year, you can only assume, I think it was 3 quarters. In fiscal '20, you'll get the full 12 months, so that's about $230,000. Your other funding sources, which is basically free cash and your deficit financing notes, you don't have that anymore. So that's $4.5 million of revenue gone. So you've got $7 to $8 million of revenue to spend, okay? So where's it go? Well, I level funded all the city departments except to put back the cuts that you're hopefully going to vote tonight. So this doesn't account for step increases, this doesn't cost for longevity increases, this doesn't account for any of the other collectively bargained increases that are in a contract without a COLA, okay? It doesn't account for any increase in the solid waste budget or anything like that. It's just pure level funding. School department, as I said, an analysis was done, and the $8.4 million is the combination of the Chapter 70 aid plus about $1.5 million to $2 million of money that the city is going to need to find to fund the school budget. I can guarantee you these are not going to be the final numbers. This is a first crack at looking at what growth could be in the school budget. Employee benefits, remember the chart, the 2 biggest things were pensions and health insurance. Pensions is going to grow by $1.1 million per your existing schedule. Health insurance, I used an estimate of 4% rate increase. I don't know if that's right, but you can see what it gets you. Between those 2 items, that's $3 million of increase for 2 line items in the budget. Debt service, took your existing debt service, added the bands for the recently approved projects and the ones that are before you tonight, and the deficit financing notes, principal and interest cost. So the growth on that is about $400,000. State assessments, I used a 2.5% increase. I can guarantee you that's not going to be the number, but it's an estimate. Prior year deficits. So we're assuming there's no health insurance trust fund deficit at the end of '19 that's got to be accounted for in '20. So that leaves snow and ice. I have no idea. Nobody knows how much it's going to snow this year and how much that means in a deficit. But historically, it's been about $1.8 million. So that's what I get carried in there. So it's a reduction of $640,000. Collective bargaining, talked about that before. I purposely got a question mark in there. It's a big discussion for the city. I think each point in the city side is worth about $500,000 or $600,000. And then miscellaneous, the big item there is that supplemental reserve fund to ensure fiscal stability that's required. That grows from 0.25% of your budget to 0.5% of your budget. So that's about a $900,000 increase. So $13 million of increase in expenditures. So here we are in October saying that a very first cut at this is showing that the revenue growth isn't enough to cover the expenditure growth. So I'm not saying there's a deficit, because there can't be, and there won't be. The mayor's going to put together a budget that balances. That's what he's talking about, the tough decisions that need to be made. So where are some areas to explore? You know, where are the tough decisions going to come from? Health insurance has to be one of the items that the city looks at. There's multiple millions of dollars, and Michael can talk to it. He's run some very preliminary analyses. You know, the community, every community in the Commonwealth can go into the state's GIC program. I know that it's, can be, it's a touchy issue with public employees, but there's a lot of money to be saved for the taxpayer and for the city budget. Even without going into the GIC, there's ways to save money. The city needs to seriously look at the options around health insurance. Another reason why that's really important, so three things I talked about previously. Balance the 20 budget, provide money for your capital plan, which you currently don't have that you need, and potentially allow for wage adjustments in fiscal 20. If you do something in health insurance that saves millions of dollars, that can help you address maybe not all of those three things, but probably two of those three things. So it's a big area of your budget to look at, and by saving money there, you can do some other things that the city needs to do to move forward. You can look at your service delivery models. There are some things that are done in-house now that might be cheaper to do contractually, or vice versa. There's been communities that have taken services in-house to save money. But looking at, especially with an aging workforce where you're going to have people retiring, you have the ability to take a fresh look at how you deliver services in your community. Fee structures. I read the Lynn item every day now. It seems like once a week I see proposals for units of housing and commercial development, which is awesome. That's only going to help you in the long run. Look at your fee structure for building permits. You might be able to generate some money. Don't budget for it. Help build up reserves, right? Look at all of your fees across the board. Hotel excise. If there's a hotel in the works, and I don't know if there is, you should adopt the hotel excise tax. That will generate not just new growth in your tax base, but you get the hotel tax associated with that. Look at staffing levels. Big three: police, fire, DPW. When you have the demographics of your workforce, not just in Lynn, but in pretty much every community, that are going to be retiring in good numbers soon, it's a good opportunity to step back and look, are these staffing levels the right levels now, especially with technology? It's another one. If you invest in technology, you might be able to do things more efficiently or actually without labor. And then cost recovery models. I admit I don't know the details about the golf course or the auditorium that we're sitting in, but those are businesses, right, within the municipality. You should make sure you cover at a minimum all of your costs. So anything that you have that you're recovering some revenue for, you should take a hard look at that and see if there's ways to generate additional revenue to cover those costs, which then frees up money to fund other services. So, these are things most communities will look at every single year. Should we adjust our fees? What about cost recovery? What about contracting out, street sweeping or grounds maintenance, whatever it might be? These are things that communities go through every year, and then they're not fun discussions sometimes, but they're things that communities need to look at in a Prop 2.5 environment, and especially things that I think the city needs to look at when you're looking at a very difficult fiscal 20. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sean. Do any of the councils have a question? Go ahead. So Lozy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sean, did you prepare this document? Is this your PowerPoint?
Yes.
Very well done. I have to say, it's excellent. It's very comprehensive, and it gives a very good explanation of where we're at. I wish we had this 2 years ago. I think, I recall the council, we did have auditors come in, and they audited the budget, but it was very complicated. You've captured very well in 10 pages where we're at and where we're going and what we need to do. Oh, because of the unknown variables coming up, we've got 8 months to get our house in order. So I just want to thank you for being there for us and lending us your expertise.
Oh, great. I'm glad it was helpful. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councilor Staben.
Thank you, Mr. President. Great job. It makes it easy to understand. Lynn's got about 18% of its population in school. It's been explained many times, we're being strangled by net school spending numbers. And I've kind of quickly looked around, just, population, go on DESE website and see what the school populations are. And I haven't found any communities around us that are at that level. Is there a state average, do you know? Average population of school-age children in the public schools?
I don't know that, but Desi would have that, and if it's not available online, you can shoot me an email, and I can try to track it down from them, because they would be the ones who would know that.
Compared to even other cities, Salem, Revere, kind of the same demographic, smaller, of course, but same demographic, much smaller on a percentage basis than what Lynn is. Would you suggest that going forward, as you said, proposed developments at all, as we approve those developments coming down the line, that we should be conscious of that and approving 3+ bedroom type of units, so that we're not bringing in a larger influx of school-age children into our system?
That's always a difficult conversation when you're talking about development. In the community that I worked at before, came back to the state, very similar in terms of physically ran out of space to put kids, and there are a number of 40B applications in the community. No development was welcome. I shouldn't say no, certain types of development wasn't welcome because of the concern about more kids going into the system. But what we learned there, and this is, so I'll sort of answer the question, what we learned there, it wasn't just the new development, it was actually the empty nesters who were moving out. Younger families were coming in with kids. So it's not just the development, you should look at that other side of it, but yeah, I think it's fair to ask consultants, developers, whoever that are putting that together, what do they estimate for, family sizes coming in, and what kind of pressure does that put on your schools? The state does pay, I think, about 75%, give or take. So, you need to look at that. But to me, the big thing is the space. What I've been told is that you're physically running out of space, and the spaces that you have aren't great.
I went on the school committee in 2010, and in the 8 years since, from 2010 through 18, there were over 3,000 new students in the Lynn schools. And even though we do get a 75% reimbursement from the state, that 25% on those 3,000 kids is $10 million a year. So when folks wonder where did the free cash go, that's where the free cash went. And as we just seem to constantly get more and more, even what we're seeing south of the border now, there's no question that they come through, some of them are coming here, and this number is just going to continue to rise, and it's going to continue to strangle us. Thank you.
Any other questions? Council LaPierre.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Cronin, I wanted to see, perhaps, I know it was mentioned that the charter tuition reimbursements were higher than expected for FY to get us through why we're borrowing, taking a vote tonight. We're sending approximately $14 or $15 million in charter school tuition out from the traditional public schools. And I'm wondering if there's something that we can do or start the conversation at the state level to fully reimburse that charter effort, because that will help with this problem immensely. And in addition to that, the Chapter 70 funding formula, which is it would really help cities like Lynn, gateway cities. And I know you're from the DOR and the conversations at the state level. If we can increase those two areas, maybe it could help cities like Lynn be able to afford what my colleague's talking about in terms of population growth. But we're really starving at that educational level and the funding piece because of the funding formula. We're shortchanged about $2 billion statewide. I can just imagine it's got to be multi-millions for Lynn that we're missing out on top of the economically disadvantaged in the governor's budget in the last couple of years that really took a lot of $5 or $6 million from our school side. So how do we address this? This is structural from a state level, and we're having our own issues here in the city. But I see charter dollars moving away, and I see population increasing here, and something's got to give. How can we sort of make those changes?
I'd give you the standard advocacy. Work with the Superintendent's Association, the Mass Association of School Committees, work with the legislative delegation. continue to push the issue, because, you know, the LGAC meetings, which happen nine times a year, which is basically MMA, the school advocates, or the members from the school community, when they have the opportunity, when the lieutenant governor's there, make that point all the time. So it's continued advocacy, but, you know, I guess I would say that the state budget, like every budget, has constraints, just like your budget, but, you know, advocate and work with folks in the school side.
But is that a logical conclusion? That's the strangulation on the city side that we're feeling, right? Is that?
If you looking purely at the numbers, the charter school assessment has grown significantly.
And it's not being reimbursed at what the state said it should be.
It's not being reimbursed.
At 55%, it should be much higher.
Well, if I remember correctly, the current formula is 100% in year one, then 25, 25, 25, 25, right?
Correct.
I believe the first year is being fully funded.
Right.
Might be wrong
No, I
with that,
think
but I think that's the case.
The successive years, it drops to, 75, 62, 50%.
I will say that, not that it will make you feel that much better, but that is net school spending eligible. So when you're looking to calculate your net school spending, that assessment is net school spending eligible, so that's less city money that you got to put in
Saving, silver lining. Thank you.
to an extent, yeah.
Any other questions? Mr. Field?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Cronin, I just want to echo my colleagues on the council that this is a great report, helps us understand it in a very short amount. One question I do have is the reserves. Can you give us a few examples of conventional uses for the reserves and maybe some non-conventional? And I want to offer one example. In August, the city suffered a major flood. Obviously, you can't prepare for something like that. It was citywide, and there was a decision made to have a curbside collection for a lot of loss of property. So a lot of the residents are concerned about the new trash fee this past year, with the potential for that to increase because of certain, acts of God, really, storms like this. So is this without any idea of state or federal assistance from storms like that to assist us? Is this a conventional use of the reserves? Are there other examples of conventional uses of these reserves that the state will allow? And maybe some other non-conventional examples.
Well, generally speaking, you can have a reserve fund that you use, any point in the year. I believe in the city, you all vote for that. In the town, it's Finance Committee. You look at any community, they're using that primarily for snow and ice, maybe some legal costs that come up during the course of the year because there might be some case going on, might use it for a settlement. You can use it for spikes. I know in my previous experience, we saw a spike in veterans benefits reimbursements. We didn't have enough money in the budget. We used that. The language actually says emergency and unforeseen, which is pretty broad. So that can cover most of the issues on a normal basis, right? Then you have a general stabilization fund, which requires a 2/3 vote of the money into it and a 2/3 vote of the money out of it. That's the rainy day fund. That's where, when the city's really able to, that's where you should start plowing some money into it. Plus, the rating agencies love it. That can be used for anything, with any emergency, actually for any expense, because it's a stabilization fund. So if you have an experience where you have a storm, you can tap into that. So, generally speaking, between those two reserves, what we say, and free cash is another form of reserve. If you have those three equal to 7 to 10% of your budget, that's a good place to be. Lynn's at 0 for stabilization fund and pretty low on free cash. The $1 million reserve fund, I think, that you have for the events that come up during the course of a year. And then you do have the required stabilization fund, reserve fund in here. So you can you should have a strategy which goes to the concept of developing financial policies, where you say, these are the reserves we should have, these are the levels they should be at, and this is how we're going to fund them. Then you build that into your financial forecast model, tie that in with your capital plan, you see how everything can hang together. And you should have a target that your stabilization fund and free cash are X% of the budget. It might not be 7 to 10%, but if you have a target that works for the city, you then have that there. You can do a special purpose stabilization fund where, say you have some free cash that comes in, or you got some one-time revenue that comes in, city council approves it, and by special purpose, I mean it can be for any special purpose you want. Once the money's in there, it can only be spent on that purpose. So, you could have a storm stabilization fund, you could have anything like that. The key is finding the money to put into the fund.
And a follow-up on that, with an insurance cost as a self-insured city, with unforeseen expenses on employer expenses, after the fact.
So you could, let me just be sure I understand the question. So if you have a deficit in health insurance because you're self-insured, could you use a reserve fund to plug that? Yeah. And you could use general stabilization. So if the city had those types of reserve, say the city didn't spend all its free cash like it did, could have used that to plug the deficit in the health insurance trust fund so you wouldn't have to raise it in fiscal 19.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll say thank you to Sean for coming out here tonight.
My pleasure.
Again, as usual, great presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Any discussion? It's the wish of the council.
Motion to approve.
Motion made. Second. To approve and seconded. I'm going to ask the clerk to read the order.
Okay, order that $4.5 million is appropriated to assist the city in achieving a balanced budget for fiscal years 2018 and 19, including the payment of all costs incidental and thereto related, and that to meet this appropriation, the city treasurer, with the approval of the mayor, is authorized to borrow said amount under and pursuant to Chapter 58 of the Acts of 2018, or pursuant to any other enabling authority, and to issue bonds or notes of the city therefore. Any premium received upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this order, less any such premium applied to the payment of the cost of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this order in accordance with MGL Chapter 44, Section 20, thereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such costs by a like amount. Also ordered that the treasurer is authorized to file an application with the appropriate officials of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to qualify under Chapter 44A of the general laws any and all bonds or notes of the city to be issued pursuant to this order, and to provide such information and execute such documents as such officials of the Commonwealth may require.
Motion made, seconded, discussion, roll call.
Counsel Barton?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Capano?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Chakutis?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Calucci?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Seer?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Field?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel LaPierre?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Lozey?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Net?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Staben?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Walsh?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, on to the next order, the LED bond. I don't know, Mike, you want to come up and say a few words about this? Please make it a few. We have the Red Sox tonight, so
2-1.
2-1, right?
Top of 2.
Sure. It was spoke about last meeting that several councilors brought this up years ago, so it's now coming to fruition where our ISD director has recommended and pushed me to push this forward because it is a really good deal for the city. Essentially, we're looking at switching approximately 6,800 sodium Cobra heads over to high-efficiency LED lights. So with the 2.35 million we're requesting, approximately 1.1 million is going to come back in rebates from National Grid and the MAPC. So the net cost is about $1.25 million. The savings that we're going to generate is going to make that bond that we borrow paid off within 3 years. So it's good for the environment, it's good for the budget, and it's something that we should be looking forward to doing more of.
Thank you, Mike. We also have Mike Donovan here tonight. If any of the councilors have any questions, or if you want to say anything, Mike? He's here for questions. So, councilors, Councilor Capano.
Yeah, question for Mike. Mike, I believe you've answered this in the past, but just to refresh my memory, or if I remember wrong, are these lights bright? Like when we replace some of the lights in the past to save money, the lights are just not as bright. And there's some dark areas in the city, and, you know, even though the light's on, it's still dark, you know, so how are these gonna be?
These will offer the same amount of lumens that we have currently. However, we've done the audit of what we have for existing lights out there. We've also done an audit on the physical condition of some of the lights. There are a lot of lights in the city of Lynn that are blocked by trees, and it causes dark spots. Or even if the light coming down isn't blocked, the lateral spread of it is not what it could be. These lights will be the same essential, not wattage, I'm going to use the term wattage, that we have out there now, whether it's 50s, 100s, 200s, and we're looking at the areas where they're mixed to make, because we have some streets where there's a 50, there's a 100, there's a 200, and that's wrong. The street may call for 200 the whole way. The street may call for 100 the whole way. So we're looking at that to make sure that the lighting is consistent throughout for the type of street it is. A busier street should be a little bit brighter than a quiet residential neighborhood. But we're not going to see these lights make a significant change from what we have now, no.
The other question is, Mike, is how long do the lights last? You know, the lights go out a lot, and, you know, it's hard to keep up with all the lights that are out all over the city. Will they last longer than the ones we have right now?
These lights are projected to last, I believe it's 5 times as long as the lights we have now. To the point where they have a guarantee of 10 years on the fixture. So we should see a significant decrease in our outages. Right now, at any given point in the system, we could have up to 5% of the lights that are out. We will not be seeing that for the next decade or so. We'll start to see failures after 10 years, and there always can be a failure of a fixture, something went wrong at the factory, but they're guaranteed, and we will not see, because of that, we're projecting a significant decrease in our maintenance costs to maintain the streetlights operations.
Just one more question.
No. Go ahead.
So some of the areas in West Lynn, probably other areas too, I'm not sure, but I know you're familiar with, like, Neptune Boulevard, there's underground wiring problems, I believe. When we replace the lights, will there be any other types of, you know, work done that may correct, my understanding is the reason why the lights go out so often down there is because there's underground wiring problems. At least that's what I've been told. So, you know, will there be any work done to correct that? I mean, if the idea is to, you know, improve the lighting in the city and the cost of the lighting, and I would think that would be something we could look at.
Neptune Boulevard is a systemic problem. We lose the traffic signals, we lose the streetlights. There are shorts in that network in that area. We've talked to the grid, we've worked with the grid. We've not been very successful at getting them to make the improvements in that area. This particular program is a fixture-for-fixture replacement. We're going to be replacing 6,800 fixtures in approximately 2 months. So everything will occur from the back of a truck on the pole. They're not, in this particular contract, we're not making any underground improvements. We're not adding any fixtures. This is just something that's going to save us over $400,000 a year just by putting these fixtures up there, by changing the type of light. But no, the system does need upgrade. Neptune Boulevard is, if we had the money, we should relay those conduit and bring new power to those circuits. There's no question.
Done? Any other questions? Mr. Fields?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mike, when you say 6,800, is that 100% of the pole lights, with the exclusion of obviously the antique lights, or is that a certain percentage, 80%
No,
citywide?
This is all the Cobra head, what they call Cobra head lights, the lights either on the aluminum poles or the wooden poles that stick out off, they're on a mast arm, and the fixtures at the end of that mast arm. The ornamental lights are not being considered for conversion because the LED technology is not there for ornamentals as it is there for Cobra heads.
Thank you.
Councilor Lozey?
Yes, I'm glad to see that we're moving forward on this. I've been advocating this for a while now, and the savings is such that it's a no-brainer. And as our CFO pointed out, we're going to be getting back most of the money in the form of grants and rebates. And as you're pointing out, Mike, the electrical costs are 20% of what the current streetlight costs, electric costs are. And then down the road, we're going to see savings, and this is what we need to do to help out with our deficit spending. We need to find ways to save money, and this is one of those areas where we can. And I'm just glad that we're moving forward on it. And if there's no further discussion, motion to approve.
Second.
Motion made, second. Councilor...
Just one comment, I'll be
Lapierre.
brief, Mr. President. While we're on the topic of lighting and we're spending this amount of money, I did early vote earlier. I was in the Lynn Auditorium. Our city clerk put some wonderful lighting in the back of the foyer, but it is still a little dim because there are 2 lights out on the ceiling of the auditorium. Just for seniors and others who are voting this week and next, I would like to see those 2 replaced as well. And they don't have to be LED, but that would be appropriate as well. I would make that as a friendly work order to our ISD director.
Any other questions?
I guess I'm...
Comments? Go ahead,
To adjourn.
Councilor.
We got to do a vote.
Can't, we got a long ways to go. Yeah. Madam Clerk, please read the order.
Ordered that $2,350,000 is appropriated to pay costs of converting non-ornamental streetlights to LED fixtures, including the payment of all costs incidental and related thereto, and that to meet this appropriation, the city treasurer, with the approval of the mayor, is authorized to borrow said amount under and pursuant to MGL Chapter 44, Section 7-1, or pursuant to any other enabling authority, and to issue bonds or notes to the city therefore. Any premium received upon the sale of these bonds or notes approved by this order, less any such premium applied to the payment of the cost of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this order in accordance with MGL Chapter 44, Section 20, thereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such costs by a like amount. The mayor is authorized to accept any and all rebates, grants, or other funds that may be available to the city on account of this project. The amount of any borrowing undertaken pursuant to this vote shall be reduced to the extent of any rebates, grants, or other funds received by the city on account of the project. Also ordered that the treasurer is authorized to file an application with the appropriate officials of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to qualify under MGL Chapter 44A any and all bonds or notes of the city to be issued pursuant to this order, and to provide such information and execute such documents as such officials of the Commonwealth may require.
Motion made, seconded. Discussion, roll call.
Counsel Barton?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Capano?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Chakutis?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Calucci?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Seer?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Field?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Lapierre?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Lozey?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Net?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Starbed?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Walsh?
Yes.
Okay, we need a emergency on the LED bond. Councilor Calucci. Motion made.
Second.
Seconded.
Counsel Barton?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Capano?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Chakutis?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Calucci? Yes. Counsel Seer?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Field?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Lapierre?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Lozey?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Net?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Starbed?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Walsh?
Yes.
Yes.
We also need an emergency on the 4.5 million.
Do it.
Motion made.
Second.
Seconded. Roll call.
Counsel Barton?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Capano?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Chakutis?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Calucci?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Seer?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Field?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel LaPierre?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Lozey?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Net?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Staben?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Walsh?
Yes.
Yes.
Public hearings to be set down.
We have the petition of Ridgedale Convenience Store at 585 Essex Street to amend closing hours of operation from 11 p.m. to 12 a.m. Petition of National Grid for a grant of location at the corner of North Common Street at Hanover Street to number 73 North Common Street. Petition of Comcast for a grant of location at the following locations: 33 Carolyn Road, 580 Linway, Commercial Street and Circle Ave, and 25 Exchange Street. Petition of Crown Castle to modify transmission equipment at an existing base station within the public right-of-way located at the following locations: 32 Erie Street, 16 Pierce Street, 15-19 Garland Street, Atlantic/35 Grosvenor Street, Chancery Lane, Linfield Street, 67 Woodlawn and Tapley Street, 34-38 Bona Vista Street, 16 Hanover Street, 147 Fairmount Ave, and 201 Linwood Street.
So wish of the council.
Set them down.
Motion made.
Second?
All those in favor? Carries. Committees, ordinance and rules. Councilor Lozey.
Mr. President, unanimous approval by the committee with the public hearing for a codification of the zoning. Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion to
Motion
accept.
made to approve, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Ways and Means. Councilor Net.
Mr. President, all voted of the committee to approve and make a motion to accept.
Motion made. The clerk will read all the orders.
Order that the city comptroller be and is hereby authorized to reduce general fund appropriations in the sum of $379,000 from the following accounts: Mayor's Secretary Clerk salary, $12,000, CFO salary, $101,000, purchasing salary, $7,500, Law Department salary, $25,000, Grand Army Republic salary, $14,500, insurance premiums, $135,000, and interest inside debt, $84,000. Transfer the sum of $175,074.08 from the account of insurance loss expense to the account of ISD expense to fund repairs for the Hood School modular classrooms due to extensive water damage from the storm. Order that the Department of Public Works be allowed to make expenditures for snow and ice control in the excess of the appropriations for those costs pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 31D. Certifies an available fund the amount of $93,750 as allotted to the City of Lynn Health Department by the Department of Public Health for the FY19 Mass Tobacco Cessation and Prevention Program. Ordered that His Honor the Mayor is hereby authorized to execute all documents necessary to receive a grant in the amount of $10,000 from the Massachusetts Cultural Council relating to the Lynn Cultural Compact. Ordered that the Lynn Police Department is hereby authorized to apply for the FY18 Edward Byrne Justice Assistant Grant.
Motion made, seconded, discussion, roll call.
Counsel Barton?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Capano?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Chakutis?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Calucci?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Seer?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Field?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel LaPierre?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Lozey?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Net?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Staben?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Walsh?
Yes.
Yes.
Councilor Net, was there an emergency?
Yes, they were all emergency and make motion to approve.
Motion for emergency, seconded, roll call.
Counsel Barton?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Capano?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Chakutis?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Calucci?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Seer?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Field?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel LaPierre?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Lozey?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Net?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Staben?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Walsh?
Yes.
Licensing, Councilor Walsh.
Unanimous vote of the committee, motion approved.
Second.
Motion made, seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Recreational cannabis site plan review, Councilor Staben.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unanimous recommendation that Natural Selections move forward with the special permit process of establishing a recreational cannabis establishment at 193 Oxford Street in the form of a motion.
Motion made.
Second.
Seconded, discussion, roll call.
Counsel Barton?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Capano?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Chakutis?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Calucci?
Yes.
Yes. Counsel Seer?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Field?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel LaPierre?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Lozey?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Net?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Staben?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Walsh?
Yes. Public Properties and Parks, Councilor Staben.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two items on the agenda. The first was to allow for an easement to CPR PE Monroe Street owner LLC for sidewalk easement for the construction of an apartment complex at 34 to 38 Monroe Street. Unanimous vote, form of a motion.
Motion made, seconded, roll call.
Counsel Barton? Yes. Yes, Counsel Capano?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Chakutis?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Calucci? Yes. Counselor Seer?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Field?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel LaPierre?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Lozey?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Net?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Staben?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Walsh?
Yes.
Two others on that.
What? We need an emergency on that?
I have two others that
Okay, but-
all need an emergency.
They all do, all right. we'll do
Okay,
them all
order
at
that the
once.
mayor be authorized to execute any and all documents required by the law department to effectuate the above referenced acceptance of the grant of easement. The form of a motion.
Motion made. All those in favor?
Aye.
And the third is ordered that the city solicitor's office prepare the necessary documents, deeds, and easements to allow for a land exchange between the city of Lynn and the Mass Department of Conservation and Recreation for the South Harbor site to facilitate development and improvements to the seawall in the form of a motion.
Motion made, seconded, roll call.
Counsel Barton?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Capano?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Chakutis?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, Counsel Calucci?
Yes.
Counsel Seer?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Field?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel LaPierre?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Lozey?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Net?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Staben?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Walsh?
Yes.
And a motion for emergency on all three items.
Motion for emergency, seconded, roll call.
Counsel Barton?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Capano?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Chakutis?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Calucci?
Yes.
Counsel Seer?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Field?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel LaPierre?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Lozey?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Net?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Staben?
Yes.
Yes, Counsel Walsh?
Yes. Any new business? Council LaPierre?
Just one item on the Personnel Subcommittee, Mr. President. The committee also approved the hiring of a building inspector in the ISD department.
Oh,
That was under discussion of another item,
okay.
all right?
Motion made to approve the hiring of another building
Accept the report.
inspector.
In ISD, correct.
Motion made, seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Excellent. Any other business? Councilor Field?
Thank you. I just want to recognize Lieutenant Glenn Dunnigan from the Lynn Police Department and his son Colin, who are running this Sunday in the Marine Corps Marathon. With Veterans Day coming up, they are running in honor of New England Center and Home for Veterans, and I wish them well on behalf of the city.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other new business?
I got some. Motion to adjourn.
Motion made to adjourn, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right. 2-2.